All right. Good evening, everybody. We're just getting fired up with I believe this is my first ever actual stream on on this right now. So thank you very much for joining me. If you've come in, I'll be kind of talking for a minute or two here. Then I'll get started on the details. What's going on is that it's been a couple of days since I've been able to do a Ukraine update video. I have gathered some information, although not a full-on everything like I would normally have done for a Ukraine update video. But I also don't want to lose track of it or lose track of what I was thinking at the time I started seeing it. So this is just a live stream to get caught up, basically. I don't expect a lot of people to see it, but if you do, thank you for joining me, and I hope that you find the information interesting. Again, this will not be as organized as what I normally do when I'm producing a video. This is not intended in any way to compete with the full update videos that I would normally do. This is more just about making sure I don't fall too far behind. So if you're coming in or you have not seen me before, thank you for joining me. Let's go ahead and get started on what's going on in Ukraine for the last couple of days. I'll do the map at the end, I think, and I will do everything else in the meantime. Understand there will be a lot of things where things are going to be just updating on the fly as I do so. So let's go ahead and get you to where you can see my screen. And boop. There we go. All right, first up, we've got from the Kyiv Post. This is Kirilo Budanov was actually out doing field work not too long ago, although they don't say exactly when. The weather indicates it might have been relatively recent because they've had recent rains in Ukraine. But he was out actually doing combat tasks in the field, and it was personally participating. And over a radio, he managed to convince 19 Russians to surrender. Now, I don't know how accurate this story is. That almost has that Ghost of Kyiv feel to it right off the bat. Have I stopped streaming? There it goes. Nope, it's continuing. Anyway, it's got that Ghost of Kyiv feel to it, which makes me just kind of wonder exactly how accurate it just might be. But either way, it's an interesting story, and I thought it looked fun. I am watching for comments, by the way, so if you're on the stream, be sure to let me know. An interesting bit of basically video work here. Let's go ahead and get this pulled up. I'm going to play for you this video. This is what the Azovstal steel plant looks like now. And it used to be quite a thriving facility. 10,000 employees would come here and work at the facility. This was the biggest steel plant, I think, in the world at the time, or at least one of the biggest. The Russians came and they just destroyed the place, is what it really comes down to. And yes, that's because they're the Azov battalion and the Azovstal defenders actually sat there and they defended this plant. They did not allow Russia to just waltz in and take it. The result, though, is that the entire plant facility is basically ruined. Could it potentially be, recovered? I don't know. It would take a tremendous amount of work to do so, and that much is clear. This equipment hasn't had maintenance or repair in at least, a year and a half now? It certainly is not going to be just turn a key and get ready to whip out some steel. Maybe when Ukraine finally retakes the plant, they'll be able to put it back into good working order and make good use out of all those destroyed Russian tanks that are out there. Ukraine has been seriously on an anti-air binge lately, and this is going to be scattered throughout the entire video, so please bear with me as we go through everything here. Burns well, good job. Ukraine downs yet another Russian helicopter. This would be another Mi-8 transport helicopter. No word on casualties. Aircraft can carry up to 24 troops, though we don't know how many were actually in the helicopter at the time. there's really, they've done a lot to take down helicopters and airplanes lately. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a bit here. The Russians conducted an airstrike on infrastructure in the city of Kherson. Power outages, disruptions. This was about 3 days ago now. That's how far behind I am, and we're just kind of catching up on everything going on. Now the front lines from the perspective of the Russians, and since it's kind of scattered throughout, I'm not going to set it up different. On the Donetsk front, the Russian armed forces with artillery support carried out assault operations in Marinka and Pervomaisky. That is basically around Avdiivka. There's been some progress back and forth, and I'm going to summarize kind of the next couple of days of Avdiivka here. Let's pop over here and zoom in. As things have continued at Avdiivka, the Russians have been pouring more and more men, equipment, and gear into the area. Let me move this over just a little bit more so it's a bit more visible there. And pull out the old, this thing right here, which you don't see, but that's okay, because I will probably need it eventually. They've been trying their best to make inroads into Avdiivka. Now, initially, there were reports that, they caught the Ukrainians entirely by surprise. That's kind of maybe not true. At least they're indicating that perhaps they let them think they were taking them by surprise. And, of course, now the Russians are basically beating their heads against some of the most formidable fortifications built by the Ukrainians over the last 8 years. They've been holding that town for that long. And so this has been an active part of the front for years, and therefore it has years of building up to actually reinforce it. The Russians tried to push in from Krasnohorivka across here, get over to Stepova, and get what they call the slag tip. There we go. It's basically a pile of rubble and debris that was used for production there, chemical production in the plant in the area. It turned out that they weren't able to take on that task. My previous video showed some videos of the Russians losing equipment in that area. So that was what they ended up trying to do, and they've been pretty much pushed back from this area. So in this area, there's maybe a little bit of progress, but not a ton. Same thing is happening down here near Vodiane and Optine. Opietna. There we go, Opietna. They tried to push in this way originally, came up against pretty much a wall of Ukrainians, and then ended up having to turn tail and go back. And it looks like they kind of worked their way this way. And that's kind of how things have ended up at. There is some word that they've been trying to also assault this direction. I don't know how much stock to put into that, but that rumor is out there. And it wasn't that long ago that the Ukrainians destroyed the bridge right over here. So they're making the supply situation for Russia very untenable in the Avdiivka area. Okay, sorry I ended up in the map a lot sooner than I expected. Let's see. There's also information about Marinka, which is... Dang, I'm going to end up in the map again. Marinka right here. This would be, just for reference here, here's Donetsk over here on the right. And this here is where Marinka is. And Russia has been managing to do basically small city-by-city advances. They've even been trying to push down to the south a bit more here recently, trying to make some progress in the area. But so far, no major changes have been reported. Bakhmut, Ukrainians are holding their new positions. Russia keeps trying, and they keep failing, according to, again, the Russian perspective is what we're looking at right now. Luhansk has been an interesting one. Now, I am kind of mixing up the next few days of information here. They tried to advance in Makiivka. They've tried to advance in Sinkiivka. That's all up here in this area right here. They keep trying to push in, and it sounds like this is from information over the next couple of days as far as the reports are. They tried to push in again. They made some progress, and then the Ukrainians kicked them right clean back out of there, just right back to their original starting positions, basically at Limon Pershi. So that's kind of the update on the front lines. I guess I've done it a little sooner than I expected. Moving forward, let's see. No major changes near basically Verbova and Novoprokopivka. They have been making progress towards Kopani, and there's been some information that has been a back and forth thing over there. I think pretty much it's still a lot of progress for Ukraine in that direction. They're trying to broaden out the that salient and make it into more of a front. So interesting to watch. Moving on to more newsy items, Latvia has closed 2 checkpoints on the border with the Russian Federation. That would be, they're putting in concrete barriers. Obviously, that's not going to stop an actual military force. But by closing those checkpoints, anything that does happen there will be painfully obvious. And therefore, they're watching their backs. See, clashes in the east continue. Null Reports is a really great source. If you're on Twitter a lot, you can take a look at it and kind of know what's going on in a lot of the area around the Ukraine war. That said, pretty much most of this we've touched on briefly, so I don't think we need to continue on it. Now, Dmitry at War Translated, great content. He basically gets messages that end up coming through on the Russian Telegram and the Russian Twitter and all the Russian channels. He finds it, and then he translates it for the rest of us. So we end up knowing kind of better what's going on. In this case, they're talking about the area south of Bakhmut, stating that Ukrainians have been establishing themselves on the other side of the railway line. Let's pop over there. Boop. Boop, boop. And we are in Klishchiivka and Andriivka. That's indicating let's move to the latest lines. I don't think there's been any changes here. But they're talking about actually making progress in this area for the Ukrainians, getting on the other side of the railroad lines here, which was the major defensive structure for Russia in this area. So if they're already across that, then it's going to be a real tough time for them to recover any positions here. They'd have to basically fall back all the way to Avdiivka in order to be able to set up a new defensive line. Of course, they also complain about the quality of the command, so there is that as well. More PMC stuff coming out. The Defense Intelligence update from the UK talks about basically they're trying to hide their intentions on this one. They're recruiting mercenaries under the guise of volunteers. They're still probably getting more pay and more benefits from it. But either way, that's their plan, is they're doing that type of work. Rail logistics continue to be a vital component in sustaining Russia's invasion, and they are expanding the rail network, especially in the south of Ukraine, to try and make it so they have the ability to resupply their troops without having to rely on bridges from Crimea or closer roads that are closer to the front like they have to right now. Right. Okay, yes, I caught this one the other day. It's 2 days old now, so I'm kind of trying to catch up. Russian convicts who signed 6-month contracts with the Russian Ministry of Defense to fight in Ukraine in exchange for a pardon are being told, oh, no. New contracts, 1 year, you're still a criminal. I can't believe they believed that the Russians would keep their word on that. 3, and I'm going to just put it this way, there are actually 4 Su-25s have been shut down in the Donetsk region. That is probably largely due to the situation in Avdiivka, where they have been pushing and pushing. The Russians have been pushing hard and trying to actually create a hole in these very strong front lines over in that area. And in that process, they've been making heavy use of aviation, like to the tune of losing 4 Su-25s. That's bad news for Russia, is what it is. Zelensky, after the whole situation in Israel started kicking off, he said that he wanted to make a solidarity visit to Israel and basically pay his respects. And they said now is not the right time. And yet I've seen President Biden, I've seen Olaf Scholz, I've seen other politicians from other nations showing up. Seems like this is pretty selective memory right here. And it makes me wonder what's going on in old Netanyahu's head. Yeah, this Randy Mott is a Republican activist, a lawyer, an environmental businessman, and a former infantry officer. And so he's got some interesting takes on a lot of this stuff. The Russians, he says, are being pressed so hard on the fronts that they are no longer being cautious with their aircraft. It's quite the difference from how they've been acting so far. And now we get to the big news of the day. Airfields in Luhansk and Berdyansk suddenly exploded just the other night. This would be the 17th, so this would be yesterday. And they found amongst the ruins of everything that was dropped these grenades. These are M74 APAM submunitions out of the ATACMS Block 1 missile. That's the M39. It's the one with the shorter range and no GPS abilities in it. So interesting to see this happening. The Russians were definitely not prepared for it because, let's see if I can find it now. 9 helicopters, some special purpose vehicles, I believe it was 4, an air defense systems, an ammo cache, and the airstrip itself were all damaged during the actions on the Berdyansk airfield. And that's with just a couple of ATACMS missiles. They managed to really make a huge outsized effect for the limited number of ATACMS they received. And we'll talk about that number as we go along. Other reports, the same thing. This is supposedly video of that airfield, of the fires on the airfield with some of the helicopters being damaged by these munitions. It means that those ATACMS, 30-year-old munitions, were easily able to bypass Russia's air defenses and take out the targets that they were aiming for. 30-year-old munitions. And yes, that means the Russians are still keeping their helicopters and jets in Ukraine and uncovered. So no netting or no meshing, no hangars, nothing to protect them from being hit by either a drone or, in this case, submunitions from ATACMS. Lots of people were putting out that video on Berdyansk. And a lot of this is really just coming down to the ATACMS submunitions and people being absolutely ecstatic, you might say, about the outsized effect it had right when it was deployed for the very first time. As I understand it, they fired 5 ATACMS missiles on the first night. The second night, they fired 6 for a total of 11. Let's see, do I have something that talks about how many they may have received? I know this is a lot of the same stuff here. And let's see. Okay, so I might be here later, but my memory of that is that there's some sources saying that Ukraine only received 20 of these ATACMS M39s. Others said, and it's a Russian saying that, so they're probably exaggerating. They said 80 of them. And either way, the 20 are being used to do outsized, immediate effects before Russia is able to respond properly. If they have 80, this will be a really interesting next few weeks, if not months, as Ukraine finds interesting places to drop these munitions. And if the U.S. is really on their game, about 2 months or so goes by, the longer range ATACMS missiles will show up because Russia will have responded to that change, the longer range, but not to the longest range. So new targets will become available essentially because they'll be displaced from their prepared positions to farther back positions. Old fighter bomber, he's a Russian kind of a adjacent Telegram channel, confirmed the attacks with the ATACMS missiles and says there were losses both in people and technology. A lot of damage was done, especially for the surprise attack. Let's see. And now we get into the areas where I've got to kind of scan real fast here, so bear with me just a moment. If anybody's here watching, feel free to put a comment in. I'll be watching for that as well. See, Central Military District Brigades to reinforce offensive operations. Okay. This is the Institute for the Study of War basically saying that Russia is going all in on Avdiivka. They've lost so much gear and equipment, and yet they're still pouring in more of what they don't really have to spare. And this reeks of a political order demanding they take something that means that right before the nasty weather hits, they can right back to say to Vladimir Putin, hey, we took Avdiivka. The problem is Avdiivka is not being taken. A little bit of Russian propaganda here. The Russian propagandists are saying, hey, right now we're practicing on Ukraine. Then we're coming for you, Baltic states. So if anybody really questions whether Russia was ever planning to stop in the first place, no, they were not planning to stop. The most they might have done is paused for a little while, reordered their troops, and then moved on to the next thing they wanted to take, to make one big, happy Russian empire. Not just the old Soviet Union, but the Russian Empire. This is empire building at in every way, shape, or form. The offensives being coordinated, and the Ukrainians have managed to entrench and hold back that advance, and state that the Russians have been taking a lot of damage doing so. They really didn't think this through. The 31 M1A1 Abrams tanks have arrived, and it looks like they're going to be going into battle pretty soon. What I'll be interested to see is, are they going to put cope cages on the Abrams? That would be fun to see. I'd also love to see if they're going to put explosive reactive armor, the Contact 1. Ukraine already has a production line of Contact 1 that they're installing on other tanks, like the Leopards. So why wouldn't they up armor their Abrams? Let's see, about the same information from Wargonzo again. Okay, and now the Institute for the Study of War starts talking about the ATACMS, saying it was secretly provided. We knew they had provided a small number before, kind of blew the secret, but Russia didn't do anything to stop the attacks. So when the ATACMS showed up, the Russians were caught with their pants down. I do spend a lot of time in non-English channels trying to figure out things that are going on. This was today, 5:54 a.m. A polycarbonate warehouse is on fire in Rostov-on-Don. Fire of the area of 500 meters. If they're doing anything with polycarbonates for military purposes, which I believe they are used for that, that's their plan to do it, and now it's on fire. Here's the other big news that's been popping up. The Russians have been screaming about Ukrainians crossing the Dnipro River, and they say they think the Ukrainians are going to stick it out. Now, I have no proof that they're going to stick it out, In fact, this could just be another of their cross-river raids, which would not surprise me in the slightest. There are reports of additional troops building up in that region right across the river. Will they actually do it or not? I just don't know. But they say that 2 Ukrainian Marine brigades have crossed the Dnipro River and captured villages 2 to 4 kilometers inland, according to the Kyiv Post. But I would again take this with a grain of salt. Their sources apparently are, hey Kazman, glad to see you. Thank you very much for joining me today. Glad to have you here. It's going pretty well. Today is a totally disorganized, it's kind of a Ukraine update for things I've been gathering over the last couple of days. I've been reprioritized to Israel's war, Israel-Hamas war right now. So I want to get at least the things I've found down so I don't lose track of kind of what I was thinking at the time. So glad to have you here. How are you doing? So anyway, while you're responding, I'll be watching for that. The Russian channels are stating that the Ukrainians have put 2 brigades across and captured 2 villages. Have they? I don't know. I do know that the Russians are screaming about it a lot. And there's been a lot of artillery fire, and there's a lot of reasons why they might want to do this, especially at this point in time. Opening up a second front, or not a second front, but another front over there in Kherson would very much complicate the Russians' logistics, their tactics. They've been stripping this section of their best troops to send them over to stop the Ukrainians at Verbova, Novoprokopivka, and that area right there. So they've really kind of stripped it down. There may not be enough of their forces left at Kherson to effectively counter it. There's a report also, and again, this is all coming from the Russians, so the Kyiv Post may be jumping a little bit ahead, putting the cart before the horse. But they also indicate that there was a rail bridge further up the river that they also did a crossing at and are starting to move into that area. Now, the bridge itself has been destroyed, but it could be used to rebridge the river. So lots of interesting things going on, total speculation going on. The Kyiv Post, they say, found no reports in the public domain of Ukrainian army attempts to deploy ferries, which would be what would be required to be able to make this into a full front. They've got to be able to resupply and get heavy equipment across the river. Otherwise, this is nothing more than a raid. It can never be anything more than that. How do I determine what's the fog of war? The truth is that there's so much fog of war all the time that I pretty much default to everything being the fog of war, and then try and drill down until I get enough information that's confirmable to actually feel confident that I have reached a logical spot for it. Something that makes sense both in the picture of what's going on from every other source I'm seeing, what works for this one, does it make tactical sense, does it make strategic sense? Not that I'm a tactician or a strategician, but my mental picture of the situation needs to be satisfied that it makes sense. I do a lot of double checking of sources, going to a variety of places, both official sources, unofficial sources, open source intelligence gatherers, all those things. If I cannot confirm a piece of information, it's automatically considered to be fog of war or inaccurate. Like the situation around Kopani right now, very much fog of war because what I'm seeing from the Russians and what I'm seeing from the Ukrainians does not match. Anyway, let's see. If you have other questions, absolutely ask them. I am watching. I got my eye on you. Now, this is from the ATACMS information that I talked about earlier. These are from Berdyansk. You can see some of the destroyed helicopters right there on the edges of the airfield. And a lot of this is because that ATACMS really did a number on Russian aviation. Like I said, 9 helicopters confirmed so far. I'm betting that number is going to go up, especially with the attacks with the ATACMS that have been reported from today I just don't have any information on those yet. Now, the New York Times, that's where it is. The New York Times reported 20 ATACMS were sent to Ukraine. Let me see. I can quickly scan ahead here. Okay, maybe not so quickly here. There is a ton of information on this that's been going back and forth. Okay. Okay, here we go. Gray Zone, which is a Wagner-affiliated account, claims that 80 ATACMS have been sent to Ukraine. I have no proof of that. Then again, I have no proof beyond the New York Times article of 20 ATACMS being delivered. 11 have been fired so far, so I know 11 ATACMS have been delivered to Ukraine because 11 ATACMS have been visually confirmed to have been fired. Let's see, anything interesting in this real quick? I think I've already kind of summarized much of this already. Pishchenivka. Where is Pishchenivka? Now here's where you get to see the fun part of all this thing. I have not heard of Pishchenivka. It could be off of the Kherson front right there. Let's see if I can find it. Pishchenivka. Okay, I lucked out this time. Usually I end up having to change the spelling about 3 times to figure it out. Okay, so let's see. This is Pishchenivka. Here's the Antonovsky Bridge. Let's see, pop this on real fast. This is the Antonovsky Bridge right here. This is Pishchenivka over here. Whoops. Yeah, Pishchenivka, that's correct. That's Pishchenivka over here. And we know that, at least from the reports, the Ukrainians crossed right about in here, trying to get across this area. Have they? There's also reports that they may have gone over. See, hold on, I got to see my cursor now. There we go. They may have also crossed over here. So finding out the information is interesting. That said, I've heard about Poima and Pishchenivka. I've not heard about Podstepna as being actually captured. Let's see, now that I've done that, I got to go find the tab I was on. Okay, so this is geolocated footage showing the Ukrainian presence on the outskirts of Pishchenivka. Is this a foothold? Is it just a raid? Null Reports thinks it's just a raid. I am, at this point, inclined to be in agreement with that. That does put it kind of in a gray zone. In fact, let's see, I think they had some maps there. Yes, take a look at their map that they created for that one. Let's see, yeah, perfect. Big ol' honkin' gray zone heading towards Pishchenivka and Poima. So that's the difference in that front there. Again, 4 Su-25s have been knocked out by Ukrainian forces this week. That is a lot of Russian aviation taken out, and it shows that the Russians are basically throwing everything at Ukraine, trying to get some documented win right before the weather turns. They do not want Ukraine to be able to go into the weather change and the changes that will require having notched a win under their belt. And if they can do it with a win under Russia's belt instead, that will be very demoralizing to the Ukrainians. More video footage of the Ukrainians on the across the river. Now this is south of Pridniprovsk. Okay, let's go find this one now. Pridniprovsk. Boof. Okay, that's still the old information. Let's go to Deep State Map. Boop. Pridniprovsk. Where is Pridniprovsk? Okay, so that's just across the river there. Okay, that's normal. We're good on that one. Boop, 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 boop. Getting caught back up here. Now, the Russians have been getting a little bit frosty under the collar talking about ATACMS missiles in Ukraine. The U.S. administration made a grave mistake by deciding to supply ATACMS tactical missiles to Ukraine. The consequences of this step will be very serious, according to the Russian ambassador to the United States. What serious things could they possibly do at this point? They have not done anything serious about any of the previous red lines that have been crossed, according to them. And this is what happens when you put too many red lines and don't actually enforce them. Okay, this is interesting, and I think this will be safe to play. Let me turn the volume down on my headset here. I'm not wearing it, so the noise is pretty loud. This is apparently a whole salvo of ATACMS missiles being launched by Ukraine. 6 missiles from being launched by Ukraine of the ATACMS type. Quite the difference between the rapid fire, smaller caliber ATACMS missiles. And of course, Gray Zone reports there's at least 80 of them. Okay, more information on Kherson. And again, I do apologize for this being really disorganized. These are just things I've managed to gather up over the last day or so. 2 days, as I've been doing other things and trying to get together so I'd have them available. I don't want to lose kind of my thought process on them, but I don't think I can just keep holding tabs open on my web browser either. Not forever. Okay, so Russians are talking about the bridgehead on the left bank of the Dnipro. They're in a panic, as Dmitry at War Translated says, but they're trying to cope. Let's go ahead and read through some of this. Let's see, how much do you see there? Okay, Kherson region. Okay, you aren't going to see that side of it. Okay, let's see. Is there something I can do? No? Okay. Hang on a second. I'm going to move something over here. Bear with me as I do so. Whoops, not that. Okay, there we go. That gets that front and center. Put my camera. Whoop, not there. Over there. There we go. Okay. The Ukrainian armed forces have concentrated several brigades of Marines to cross the Dnieper. The pontoon fleet, German-made, is estimated to be several hundred units, and there are countless boats on the other side. There's not that much riverfront. There may be a lot of boats, but I wouldn't call them countless. The very fact of the presence of the armed forces of Ukraine on our shore, is not news. They've been sitting and getting hit for months at the Antonovsky and Zeleznodorozhny bridges. However, the movement of reconnaissance, electronic warfare, and communication systems to the front lines is a clear sign. They have also been engaging in more attacks on their rear areas to disrupt logistics, communications, and command and control. And let's see what's on the second page here. Long-range missiles mentioned. They're talking about ATACMS hitting Berdyansk. The small forces of the Ukrainian armed forces, if they have not yet been knocked out after a night raid on our shore, are actively eating lead in occupied positions. So they're claiming that they're killing the Ukrainians. But if the Ukrainians are only there for a raid and they retreat, the Russians will still consider it to be a victory because they drove off the Ukrainians, even if the Ukrainians left of their totally own accord. So it doesn't really matter what Ukraine does. If they stay and eat lead, the Russians will say the same thing as if they get back on their boats and come back for another night for another raid. So anyway, that was interesting, I thought. Old Dmitry at War Translated does some really great work. Let me move things back to kind of how they were real fast. There we go. Boop. And let's see, we're getting to the end of things right now, so things have been going pretty well. Significant increase in the Russian offensive activity in the Kupiansk-Liman axis in the last 2 weeks. They're probably trying to pull off an offensive across multiple fronts to pin down Ukrainian forces and to create a buffer zone around the Luhansk Oblast. However, we've seen other reports indicating that the Russians have actually ended up losing positions over near Kupiansk and Liman. So it looks like their offensive attempts have not been working out. Their big attempts are at Avdiivka, and it's also only making, if anything, minor progress. And that's everything I have for today. Do you guys have any? Do you have any questions for me, Casman? I'd be happy to answer anything I can while I'm just sitting here. But overall, I had to just talk about the ATACMS thing for a little bit because I just didn't really want to go a long time without putting out a Ukraine update and then not being able to mention the ATACMS missiles being used. It's a huge, it's a big deal. It is, if you were ever going to say something is a game changer, this still isn't it. But it makes a huge outsized effect on the battlefield until Russia manages to adapt to the changing situation. All right, I'm not seeing anything else. Thank you very much for joining me today. This was a little bit of a stream. I don't know how long I've been streaming here. Let's see, about 40 minutes. Let me know if you want to see more of this type of thing going on, and give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next, however I put out a Ukraine update.